Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the John Gaunt podcast. The only way you're going to get true, unbiased broadcasting in the United Kingdom is by scrapping the BBC license fee and scrapping OFCOM. Let me explain. Don't forget, I was the first person to be cancelled effectively for my views on air. And that was when I was on an independent station, let alone the BBC. So I'm going to explain how we get unbiased broadcasting, or actually where it's biased, but where you're the grown-up, you can decide what you want to watch. When you go and buy a newspaper, nobody tells you you can only buy this newspaper because it's regulated, or these newspapers. You can buy the Sun or the Telegraph or the Mail or the Times or even the Guardian if you're so inclined. No one tells you what you can read. Also, no one ever tells the newspapers what they can print or not print, apart from the law of the land. And that's all we need for broadcasting. All we need is libel, slander, and defamation. The laws we've got in place. We don't need a bunch of busy nobodies, OFCOM, for example, telling us what the rules and regulations are. It's so out of date. It's all based on when there was only one TV station, one radio station, i.e. the BBC. And then there was ITV. Now there's everything, including me doing it here in this badly lit room. But I'm not controlled by OFCOM. I'm not controlled by the BBC and a license fee. I haven't got any money, but I'm not controlled by it. So I can say what I want as long as it's within the law. And surely that's the way it should be. And I'm going to expand my argument by talking about my career. As I say, I was the first person to be cancelled. People say it was because I called a counsellor a Nazi. Well, actually, when it came out, when OFCOM finally ruled and I lost my case in the Supreme Court, and the European Court even, it was because I called him an ignorant pig, the counsellor. This counsellor wanted to stop working class people from adopting or fostering because he thought they shouldn't be able to do it if they smoke. Well, I was looked after by my auntie and she smoked like a trooper. She was a matron, but she'd never smoke in front of me. She'd go out the back kitchen. And that's what I thought most people would do. But this counsellor wasn't having any of it. Big row. Now, I wrote about it. I had an article in the Sun. I used to have my own page in the Sun, as you probably know. I wrote an article about it saying, today it's the smokers, etc., etc. It was like all Nazi imagery, right? Because I thought it was too draconian by Redbridge Council, this. So this councillor had read all that, and I basically said the same thing on Talk Sport, right? This controversial radio station, right? The GB News of its time. Well, the councillor didn't complain. 57 people complained, said that I should get the sack effectively, and I did. I did, because I refused to apologise to this man. And as it happens, I was right. Do you remember after that, the residential care scandal came out? How many kids were getting abused historically and through the period in children's homes? Of course, they'd be safer with somebody like my Auntie Rosemary, who did smoke, than being in a residential home. And there's still nearly 70,000 children in England and Wales alone with no special person to tuck them up in bed at night. Nobody to say, how was your day today? Because we got these stupid rules. Cameron tried to relax them, but there are still too many kids rotting, festering in big residential children's homes. We are dreadful the way we look after our kids in care. And to stop people who might have a fag, ludicrous. And is Nazism. They were the last people to ban smoking. So I was kind of factually correct. I was rude, but I think you should have the right to be rude. Right, let me explain where I'm coming from here. When you buy a newspaper, they do have like an editor's code, but it's self-regulated. And despite the best efforts of Hacked Off and people like Hugh Grant, the actor, it's going to carry on like that. Hugh Grant, of course, wanted another Quango to look after newspapers. This was after the phone hacking. Now, I understand if you were hacked, how you would be so angry about it. I understand that. But a free press is absolutely the cornerstone of democracy and of this great country. So no one now would say, let's have a way of regulating the newspapers. Look, if you read something on the front page of the Sun today, if it's defamatory, libelous, slanderous, you can take action. We don't need busybodies saying, no, you can't write that. You just say, oh, I'm not going to buy that. And let me tell you something else about newspapers. You only buy a newspaper that confirms your own prejudices. So when you look at the front page of the newspaper, if it didn't say the kind of things that you kind of believed in, you wouldn't buy it. So, for example, Jaguar's in the papers at the moment, isn't it? So everybody is a bit upset about this woke advertising. Well, certainly the tabloids. You wouldn't expect a tabloid, the Sun or the Mail, to say, oh, yeah, the Jaguar got it right. They are horrible gas guzzlers. Let's change the image. Let's go woke. What a wonderful advert with all those wonderful people in it. And it's all diverse. And, oh, yes, who cares about the fact we're ditching a brand that is so intrinsically British? But you would expect that in The Guardian or in Independent. And check it out. That's what you got. So it reinforces your prejudices. I don't understand why radio and TV can do the same, can't do the same. When I set up Sun Talk, which was after I got the sack from TalkSport, we set up this radio station, and it was only radio on the internet. It should have been TV, looking back on it, which they then reinvented years later and, of course, fucked it up completely. However, when we did it, we won a digital prize for innovation because it was a good idea. Harness the power of the Sun's newsroom and all those brilliant journalists to talk about their specialist subjects and talk about the news. But because we were only on the internet, we could be biased. We could be like the newspaper. We didn't have to say on the one hand there's this and on the other hand there's that. So I'm basically saying scrap Ofcom, scrap the BBC, and then you'll get, well, it'll be biased, but unbiased, because you will pick what you want to watch, what you want to listen to. You don't need somebody else telling you how to wipe your broadcasting ears, so to speak, do you? When you buy the newspaper, you look at it, you read it, you agree, you disagree. You might send an email off. You might talk about it on Twitter. You might talk about it on Facebook. You might slag your newspaper off. But you don't need a busybody telling it what it can and cannot print. Now, the BBC have a thing called producers' guidelines, which they're all meant to abide by. Now, we know with all the scandals, and the latest scandal about Greg Wallace, and before that we had Hugh Edwards, and before that we had Jimmy Savile and Stuart Hall. I mean, the BBC with Ofcom have got a great system, haven't they? Nothing ever goes wrong. But they and all the commercial stations that came afterwards have to sign up to the Ofcom rules. Why? There's laws there. If they break the law, take them to court. Now, you might say, well, GB News is more independent. Well, no, it's not. It's just got a huge fine, over 100 grand, unfairly, in my opinion. But they shouldn't be regulated by Ofcom. And this is the bizarre thing. If GB News had decided just to go on the internet, not be on linear, old-fashioned, lamestream, mainstream telly, they wouldn't be regulated by Ofcom. And they wouldn't be getting fined. They wouldn't get the penetration, madam, that they're getting, maybe, because people still do watch linear telly. Not as much as they used to, but they still do. But my point is, why have we got Ofcom, which is from a bygone age? When you turn on GB News, do you really think Bev Turner or Andrew Pearce from the Daily Mail are going to be unbiased? Of course they're not. They're right wing. Nigel Farage, of course not. Hey, I'm not criticising it. I think that's great. If that's what you want. When we set up Sun Talk, this was going to be my point to you. Polly Toynbee, who writes for The Guardian, which no one reads, but she's always on Question Time. She's always on the telly. She's always the part of the liberal commentariat. She said, Gaunt, because they think they can be rude because lefties do, don't they? She said, we were trying to set up a Fox News, to which my reply was, so what? Why can't we have a Fox News in the UK? Why can't we have a programme that is definitely right of centre, a TV station. Why not? Why can't we do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the uber liberals, the Polly Toynbees of this world, the Ofcoms of the world, control everything. So it's okay while the majority of the radio and TV stations are coming from their angle. That's acceptable. That's acceptable. And you know what that is. So it's a pro-immigration. It's anti-Israel. It's pro-Palestine. You know what their agenda is. And it's so obvious. But because all the people in Ofcom and all the people in polite society all think the same, they get away with it. They get away with terrible bias. Absolute terrible bias. Well, I'm saying let's have a level playing field. If the BBC want to be lefty, get on with it. I've got something else to add to this in a minute. But if they want to be lefty, let them get on with it. At least you know where it's coming from. You know the angle. And then you can decide to... I mean, I still read The Guardian 2 or 3 times a week. I don't buy it. I read it online. Because sometimes it's good to know what your enemy is up to. It's important to know what rubbish they're thinking, yeah? However, what I say is let's have a level playing field. When you turn on GB News, just like when you buy The Sun or the Daily Mail or the Express or the Telegraph, you know it's going to be right of centre. But you're a grown-up, so you think, oh, yeah, that's a bit biased. You know, you read something in The Sun or the Mail, you know, hang on, you're going a bit far there. Because we're intelligent, sentient people, aren't we? We're clever. But the uber liberal middle classes, yeah, the Guardian readers, yeah, the Birkenstock open sandal wearing, let's go to Kefalonia, let's go skinny dipping, and let's have a flipping tofu burger mob, think they know they're better than you. It was the same with Brexit. They thought we were all thick. That's why they call us gammon. They're allowed to be that offensive, but we're not. Just go on Twitter now and see how rude and objectionable and offensive they are, calling you a retard. They use all these terms, which if you used it and you're of the right, you'd get shot down in flames. So I'm saying level playing field. The regulation for newspapers should be it should be the same regulation for radio and TV. Now, that would allow bias. That would allow us to say GB News is a right-wing TV channel, because it is, even though they're desperately trying to say, no, we try to show both sides of the arguments. They don't really, and I don't blame them. They always have, you know, on those panels, they always have 2 right-wingers and 1 left-winger, and the daft sod who's come on as the lefty gets beaten up. And that's the way it is. But we all know that. But that doesn't mean they don't introduce good ideas, because sometimes they bring on the token lefty and they come out with some interesting stuff, because you need that within a debate. You need both sides of the argument. But what you also have to admit is that it's like a newspaper. You should be able to say, well, yeah, there's both sides of the argument, but we're coming down on this side. So if it was The Sun and it was paedophilia, it would be, we want a Sarah's Law. We want to know where the pedos live. We have a right to know this. We want paedophiles like Hugh Edwards when he gets caught looking at child child exploitation, child abuse, kids being penetrated at the age of 4. We want that bastard to go to jail. That's our view. Now, on the other side, Guardian, no, he doesn't need to go to prison. He needs sympathy. He needs to look at all the people who came out, right? Let's look at the people who came out and supported Hugh when he first got suspended. John Sopel, Mr. Uber Liberal himself. Where did he used to work? Oh, there's a surprise. The BBC. Now, I'm not having a go at people at the BBC. I've got a lot of friends who still work there. But they are institutionally biased left-wingers. It's the way it is. So they're pro-gay, they're pro-trans, they're pro. All of the liberal agenda. They never stop to think, well, maybe there's another side. But they get away with it. Whereas poor old GB News, if they do a broadcast where it's anti some of those things, they get slaughtered. You've had a left-wing campaign, Hope Not Hate, where they've been telling advertisers, don't advertise with them. Now, the funny thing is, they're just now more successful than Sky News in the slots and Sky BBC News, not on the BBC One, but they're now challenging them. So there's obviously a market for what they're doing. Let them do it. And they would flourish even more if Ofcom was scrapped and you knew that when you turned on GB News, it was going to reinforce most of your prejudices. And I don't use the word prejudice as a negative. Then that would be fine, wouldn't it? However, this is the proviso. You can't then let the BBC get away with it, still keep the license fee, because they've got the license fee. And this is why the license fee must be scrapped or radically or reformed. They have to try and be balanced, which, as we all know, is rubbish. They are not balanced. They will never be balanced because everybody's got a bias. And the BBC attracts a certain kind of staff member. Think of somebody who's right-wing on the BBC now that Andrew Neil's left. Shall I answer the question for you? You can't. You can't. Would they ever give Nigel Farage a gig? No. Should they? Yes. Imagine Nigel Farage, well, I mean, apart from the fact he's a sitting MP, but if he was on, say, a late night show at 10 o'clock, they'd have a ratings buster because a load of the uber liberals would tune in. There'd be loads of publicity about you shouldn't give him a gig, but he would bring a different perspective. And if the BBC is meant to educate, to inform and entertain, why can't he fit in their presenting roster? Let me tell you about the BBC. When you go to the BBC, you get indoctrinated by it. I got a job in BBC radio, local radio, which, by the way, I think has still got quite a part to play in the media landscape. I would find a way of funding that. However, I got a job there and I couldn't believe the bias and I couldn't believe the contradiction that in the newsroom, when they were looking for subjects to talk about on their morning show or their breakfast show, where did they look first? The Daily Mail and the Sun. And then what did they have on in the newsroom? It wasn't bloody BBC News, it was Sky. And then the weirdest thing was a thing called GNS. I think it stood for General News Service. Some very talented people worked there. But they were based in London, I think in Westminster. And they would send up the Rip and Read. Right? And this would come up at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, and through the day, which would have all the news stories the BBC were covering. Basically, what that meant in the morning, all of the stuff that Radio 4 were going to do in terms of on the Today programme. So in a sense, it was the government, because the government would say, yeah, we've got this minister. It became a joke. Who's on the 8:10 slot, right? 10 past 8, there's a government minister bullshitting, right? That was just the way it is. Don't believe me? Watch or listen to Today tomorrow. Then tune into your local radio. Whatever they're discussing on the Today programme, they'll be discussing on the 38 or 40 local radio stations. This is almost Pravda. This is almost North Korea, because he's basically saying to Doris in Earlsdon in Coventry, this is the way it is, and saying to Hugh, who listens to Radio 4 and is a top barrister, the same story with the same slant. Now, when I got on local radio, we began to change that. We had this guy, this manager called Andy Wright. And without Andy Wright, I would have never got on in radio. He just loved what I'd done with my theatre company and my club in Coventry and the fact that I'd gone bust, or the company had gone bust. And he gave me a gig. He gave me a tryout. And then he put me on the breakfast show. And he also paid for me to go to America. And he said, when you go on holiday, because you need a holiday, imagine that. This is in the days when the BBC had a cocktail cabinet in the manager's office, right? And he was just this weedy little bloke. He said, when you go to America, buy an AM radio, cost you about $10, and sit by the pool and listen to the medium wave, to all the talk jocks over there. I said, yeah, all right, mate, no problem. So we went off to Florida, stayed in a place called Fort Myers Beach, and this place called the Dolphin Inn, right? It made Crossroads look glamorous, but we had a fantastic time, me and Lisa. And I listened to these guys, and I suddenly thought, flipping heck, that's what local radio should be. Just chewing the cud and saying, oh, Andy Wright summed it up. He said, just say the first thing that comes into your head. The first thing. Don't censor yourself, just say it. Anyway, I came back from Florida. And he gave me the breakfast show. And the audience literally went like this because it was talking the language of the people. And I don't want to be big-headed. I can talk. I can communicate. So many people who work for the BBC in radio and in telly can't do that. You'd think that would be the first qualification. No, the first qualification is, did you go to Oxford or Cambridge? Second qualification often is, are you gay? Third qualification, it is like that, or it was. And we tried to break that up in BBC Coventry, and we were successful. And then when I went to work in Luton, I did the same thing again. I repeated the formula. So it was playing games on the radio in the breakfast show. It was duffing up councillors. It was talking to ordinary people saying, what did you think about that? What do you think about this? And then often people would say, oh, I had Tony Blair on. You had Tony Blair on. And I spoke to him. No, they didn't. I asked the question for them effectively. I was a conduit for them. I was really proud of the work I did in local radio. For example, I think in Luton, it was 9% audience when I started. It was 19.8 when I finished, when I won all the Sonys for the coverage of Luton. And I'm not just saying, it wasn't me. It was the backing of a few managers who were enlightened, and indeed the team of young people who worked with me. So it wasn't like, oh, what's on the rip and read? So the rip and read comes up, and then they'd send packages. So it'd be like, Sellafield nuclear plant is celebrating its 5th anniversary. Here's Knob name, who used to go to Eton and used to be at Oxford, with a report. And then you push this cut. In the old days, it was a cart. You push this tape cart in, and there's 3 minutes, 52 seconds. It's always about the same length of this guy giving us a sub Radio 4 edited version for the plebs of whatever the story is. I mean, thinking back on it, it's pathetic. But sometimes I hear BBC local radio still doing the same. And then in between that now, in BBC local radio, they try to be sub Radio 2. They play the music Radio 2 wouldn't play. So it's the fucking Carpenters. Or it's, I don't know, Brotherhood of Man. Whereas Radio 2's got a good music list. But it's like, why do you want music on BBC local radio? BBC local radio should be unintelligible to the next town, let alone to anybody else. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So you don't need to follow slavishly this agenda set in London. And like I say, it's not even set by the BBC. It's effectively set by the government of the day. So you just become a mouthpiece for the government. And that's wrong. And that's what's wrong with the BBC. And so they had the BBC have this agenda where everybody thinks the same. Like I say, Andrew Neil, if you went into a BBC newsroom and asked people, and if they were honest with you, who they vote for, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who voted Tory, and certainly anybody who dared to admit they voted for Reform or Nigel Farage or any of his parties, even if their audience, and don't forget, Farage got 4 or 5 million votes at the last election. A lot of their audience is listening to BBC local radio. You wouldn't know that. Just like, what do they call it? The voice of the nation, Radio 5. My arse, it is. When you listen to Radio 5, it's all people with the same persuasion. They're all dreadfully polite. Some good presenters on there. I thought Tony Livesey was brilliant, although they sacked him for being too good. They could have sacked him or the woman. I worked with that woman. Oh, careful, I don't want to do a Greg Wallace. But she got kept on. I can only think it's because she was the female in it, and he was seen as a bully. He's a brilliant broadcaster who's got that ability to communicate. They've shoved him off to late nights. And you listen. Nicky Campbell's good at the phone. I've got to admit that. But a lot of it, it's just so obviously, achingly liberal. And they have this thing about we must have balance. They haven't got balance. It's lefty balance. Balance is, in their opinion, real balance would be, here's so-and-so, he supports Reform. Here's so-and-so, they support Labour. Boom. And let's have both sides of the argument. Without the presenter, see, this is okay on GB News, but it's not okay on the BBC. Without the presenter making sure that the lefty wins. That's what happens on the BBC all the time. Why don't they have somebody on who's anti-abortion and let them have their say? and not pass some snide comment afterwards. And the problem with the BBC local radio following the national agenda is then commercial radio stations do the same thing. So no matter where you twiddle your knob, missus, you're going to have the same propaganda. So the only way to get rid of this and give us a fair and level playing field is to scrap the BBC licence fee or completely reform it so you can apply for bits of the money if you want to put on something which the market won't provide. I don't know, high art, culture, whatever, local sport, which I think is very, very important. And I think the BBC do very, very well. Got to be said on the radio, on the local radio stations. I love the pure bias of that. And I haven't got a problem with bias when it's football or sport. I have got a problem when it's current affairs. So, the BBC in the latest election, if you were a Martian and you came down and watched the coverage, you'd have thought, oh, well, I'll come back in 2 weeks' time. Come on, Mork. Nanu. We'll come back in 2 weeks' time and the Tories, Labour will be in power and everything will be honky-dory. Or it'll be a really close result. It was a landslide. And all those polls were wrong. Who was responsible for picking the pollsters? Do you see where I'm trying to come from? So, on the day of an election, the Sun can say, the last person out of Britain turn the light off when they're slagging off Neil Kinnock. Or they can say, make sure you vote. You can't do that. And on the internet, you can do that. But you can't do that on the BBC or an OFCOM regulated station. So, during election day, there's almost a blackout. Why? Well, that goes back to when there was just the BBC and then just ITV. The world has changed. It started to change with pirate radio. It's certainly changed now. And the proof, if you don't believe me, look at the United States of America. If you believe CNN and MBNC or whatever they're called, or ABC, well, Trump was going to get hammered. And the laughing hyena was going to be the first black woman president. She got her arse tanned. Why? Because the polls, again, are institutionally biased. They probably don't go and ask a load of steel workers, if they can find them, in Pennsylvania. I don't even know whether they actually ask Hispanic and black people, because he got a load of Hispanics and blacks, like he had done in the previous election, to vote for him. So it's biased. But the clever thing that Trump did this time, along with his son, he got onto podcasts like Joe Rogan. And on those podcasts, he could expand, and he spoke for 3 hours. Rogan invited Kamala Harris on, and she said, no. And if I do it, you'll have to come to me. I'm not coming all the way to Texas to talk to you. And I'm only giving you an hour. Joe Rogan told her to swivel. So she didn't go on it. And I think that's one of the reasons, her arrogance, why she lost. And then do you remember after the American election, John Sopel and Emily Maitlis, who I used to work with at BBC London, she was a good presenter of the local BBC station. But she ain't no big political heavyweight. But of course, she went to Cambridge and she can speak Cantonese or whatever it is. So she's now like big high up in the BBC. Then she gets a job with her podcast company, who are part of the other group, not Capital, one of those anyway. So she basically gets a gig with them, who are BBC Light. So her and John Sopel, after the American election, they literally looked like somebody had smacked them round the chops with a catfish, right? That's an American reference. They just didn't understand. And they did program after program trying to analyze, why did Trump win? Well, you could have just phoned me up, Emily, and I told you. Because Trump communicates. And he goes right to the heart of what ordinary people think and are thinking. And he attracts them. And he's a natural communicator. Kamala Harris just laughs. And also, she had no policies, did she? She was part of the old regime. In fact, sometimes she made less sense than demented, senile Joe Biden. It's true. It's absolutely true. And what people hate and this is why Nigel Farage is hated by the establishment, is that he's a natural communicator. He's a popular. He's a populist. And populist and populism is almost as bad as saying the C-U-N-T word on the BBC and many of our liberal organisations who run the radio stations and the TV stations. And so he'll get 2 pages, 3 pages coverage in the Sun or the Mirror or whatever, or even the Times, with his view, not the Mirror, saying what he thinks about things, Trump, in his own words. But the rest are so busy looking for dirt to spread on him. But look how quiet they've been about Biden pardoning his son. If I was Trump, I'd go back to the last election and say, hold on a minute. We knew all this, and you wouldn't run the story. CNN and all these other big so-called global media organizations who have all been captured, and that's the only word to describe it. They've been captured, right, by the liberal left. And I wouldn't mind if it was proper left-wing, Jeremy Corbyn, George Galloway style, because you can argue with that. But it's this liberal and soft soap, woke, dare I say it, attitude and view of the world. That all immigrants are lovely. And that all of these fighting fit young men who are coming in, they're just trying to improve themselves. They don't want to do anything. Oh, okay, let's just talk about it. And that's like when they go, I'm LGBT for Palestine. All right. You'll be saying that when you're on top of a tower block and Hamas are going to push you off because you're gay. I'm all for gay rights, like you are. I want to live in a liberal society. Do whatever you want to do. I haven't got a problem. But if you go in a frock and you still got a cock, please don't go into a girl's toilet or women's changing room. That's unacceptable. Now, I can't say that on the BBC. They'd shut me up. And this is where it also happens as well. When you get invited onto these programs, they pre-interview you. I've done it. I've been on Question Time. I've been on Alan Titchmarsh. I've been on Richard and Judy. I've been on all the programs, so-called discussion programs, picking up 250 quid or 500 quid. Well, I want that 500 quid. I want that 250. So I'm going to almost fit in. And they just do it by a process of osmosis. So the producer rings up and says, oh, John, do you want to come on? What are you discussing? Fox hunting. What's your view? So I start telling them your views and they're noting it down. Okay, we'll be back to you. And if it fits their agenda, they'll have you. If it doesn't, they won't. So it's not, oh, we've got so-and-so because he's genuinely got a good feeling on this. Same with the newspaper reviews. You don't watch that anymore, do you? Newspaper reviews, even on GB News, they are rubbish. They should scrap them. Nobody buys a bloody newspaper, and they still take the newspapers as if it's the tablets from Moses. Was it Moses who came down with the tablets? It was, wasn't it? No, it's nonsense. And they talk through what the stories are going to be. How many times have you watched a newspaper review where they go, it looked like I've been taking cocaine. Sorry, my beard's too long and it's going right on my nose. But anyway, same feeling here, Gaunty. But anyway, they discuss it and they start to give it away nowadays. They go, oh, yeah, we were talking about this in the green room. What do you mean you're talking about it in the green room? You shouldn't talk to each other till you get on telly, because then it's real. Then I don't know what you think. I've done loads of telly, loads and loads, where the other person who's meant to be giving the other point of view comes up to you before and they go, oh, Gaunty, what stand are you going to take? What? What's your attitude to this? So you say to them, well, it's the way it always is. My belief is such and such and such and such. And they go, oh, I'll take the other view. There's a very famous talk presenter who I like him, so I'm not going to slag him off here, radio talk presenter, who said to me once on Richard and Judy, what's your angle? I said, my angle's just, I think it's wrong. I can't even remember what it was, what the subject was. He said, okay, I'll take the other view. And in that moment, he went down like that, in my estimation. So everything he'd said on air was being played. We used to call it in theatre, playing the effect rather than being. And it's about being, surely. Otherwise, you're conning the public. Maybe this is why I don't get any work on the mainstream anymore, because I don't want to play that game. When I nearly died of sepsis, it came just at the right time in my career, to be honest, because I just had enough of it. I just had enough of people lying, me going on panel shows or discussion shows, whether even when it was on GB News, when I thought, you're lying. You're just saying this for effect. You don't believe this. You won't stand by this. And then you get beaten up by these kids who don't believe what they're saying. And it's like, hold on. You asked me my opinion. I'm giving you my opinion. I don't give a shit whether you like it or not. Let's just get on with the discussion. Now you tell me your truth. So I say this in phoning. I'll tell you my truth. You please tell me yours. And then we can have a ding dong. And one person will win or not, or be a draw. But I'm telling you, political TV is not like that. It's getting increasingly controlled. And they're all controlled by these young producers. They have all these kids walking around with clipboards. Oh, you're on this, John. What are you talking about? Oh, John, yeah. Oh, yeah. Right? And it's all overproduced. I say open. That's like phoning. I once stood in for Edwina Curry, right, on Radio 5 for about 2 weeks or something. But the first day I got there, the producer said, oh, you're a bit late, John. I said, what do you mean? I said, what time does the show start? He said, 10 o'clock. I said, well, it's only 9:30. I'm here. What's the problem? Oh, no, we like to come in the afternoon. The afternoon? Why? Oh, because so we can plan the phone in and where the interviews are going to go. I said, well, why do you want to plan them? Don't you just start off with a question and see where we go and see what happens? Oh, no. Look. And he pulled out this map, right? It's a bit like Hitler or one of those war films, you know, where they're moving submarines around on a big table. Yeah. It was like that. He had the whole argument. And he went, you know, yeah, we got this and then this. We're going to bring on these guests and this guest will say this and that guest, because he'd interviewed them all, pre-interviewed them all, and and then they'll come to this and that'll be the conclusion. I said, and you think that's debate? You think that's real? I didn't get invited back. But you know what I mean? That's just ludicrous, isn't it? But this is all a product of the BBC licence fee and Ofcom. So you have to scrap the licence fee and you have to scrap Ofcom. When I got done by Ofcom, let me tell you how that works. Somebody makes, or in this case, 57 people. Most of them have been trying to get rid of me for ages, for anything. Right? I could have farted and they'd have tried to get rid of me. It's quite comical on one level. But Ofcom, what they do, once you get a complaint like that, the radio station suspend you. They normally carry on paying you, right? But and it's just a bit of showbiz. Not in my case, right? He wanted me out, right? So they suspend you. So by suspending you, because Ofcom moves so slowly, it's like a glacier coming down a valley, right? In fact, their views are like in the Ice Age as well. So they take so long that by the time they come to judge the complaint, the radio stroke TV station just say, oh, yeah, well, we sacked him. We got rid of him. And then that mitigates what their fine's going to be, reduces it. So it's a corrupt system. So for Talk Sport, for example, they employed me to be controversial. I don't know whether they thought it was an act, because I only ever said what I really believed, right? So and then when you are controversial, when you do say something like, well, I'm sorry, mate, I think you're a fascist, saying that white working class people can't foster if they smoke and that kids are more in danger in a children's home than there would ever be from passive smoking. Because there's complaints, I've got to say to the councillor, he never complained himself. But Ofcom then reduced the fine, or in my case, they said it was a minor infringement. And it wasn't the Nazi, it was the ignorant pig line. I shouldn't have called him an ignorant pig. Same with the court case. It wasn't really the Nazi. And what I was trying to prove in that court case was that a professional councillor or MP has heard worse than that. You hear worse than that in a chamber. You'd hear that worse than that in the council chamber, for God's sake. Let's be grown-ups. Let's have proper, honest, free speech, which sometimes people will be offended by. No problem with that. That's the way it should be. I don't mean gratuitous insults. I don't mean, I mean proper free speech where you're not hiding what you really believe. But you see, the problem with TV debates, talk radio, the genre, not an individual station, is that they're all playing a game. They're all playing a game. And the game is control and make sure Ofcom don't get upset, or the BBC Mandarins. When I first went to BBC London, you'd be talking, and it was, I was there for 5 years, right up to 7/7, and I did 9/11. And 9/11 is a good example. I've been there 6 months, and when they bombed, they flew the planes into the Twin Towers, and then we went to New York. But every time you said Muslim, you'd look up from your desk, right? You look through the studio to the control room, and it's full of management bricking themselves into their Versace trousers that you might say something racist or Islamist. And that is why certain communities get treated with kid gloves on the BBC. Forget about two-tier care and two-tier justice and two-tier policing. There's two-tier broadcasting in this country. You never really hear the voices of disaffected white working class males, do you? Even if you do find what some of them say offensive. Perhaps we need to, because then we'd understand why Reform get 4 million or 5 million votes. If we'd heard the genuine white working, and it's not just white, because it can be black people as well, white working class of the United States, we'd know. We'd all have known Trump would get elected. I predicted Trump getting elected the first time, which was a pretty safe bet. But I predicted it again this time. Loads of people keep coming up to me and saying, how did you know? Well, I know because I communicate, and he's a communicator. And he's talking about things that people care about. Immigration, the wall, food on the table, cost of living, our armed forces. Sound familiar, any of this? That's what, school, not being indoctrinated with all this nonsense, this transgender nonsense. Yeah? That's what people want. And Trump delivered it. And that's why he got a landslide. And that's why he's controlling the House and the Senate, the judges and everything. America is going to change massively. And that's why I said in yesterday's podcast, we should be aligning ourselves with Trump and the States. We should want to make Britain great again, like he's trying to make America great again. And it's possible. You've just got to grasp it and do unpopular things. But what have we got? We've got an automaton. He's not even a Dalek, is he? Or I called him a Thunderbird puppet yesterday. Starmer, he's middle management. He's not even Ricky Gervais in The Office. He's useless. He's got the charisma of a poppadom, a stale one. You know, when they go a bit limp. And who did buy his suits? And who is funding him? And why did he get all those votes? Well, he got them because he was the least worst person to vote for, didn't he? And who are these students? I mean, Angela Rayner, yeah, okay, easy to take a pot shot at her. Trevor Lammy. But look at the Chancellor of the Exchequer, lied on her CV. Look at Haig. Not William, but the other one now with the telephone. Oh, I just forgot. I forgot. It's like a shoplifter. You'll remember a famous shoplifter who got caught taking a load of whiskey or drinks out of a supermarket. The defense was, I forgot. How many times do you hear that when it's also professional middle-class people and they go, the defense basically is, I'm thick, I'm stupid, right? I'm sure that's where Greg will end up with his defense, right? It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. And it's just lies. And I'm saying, let's have some honesty in broadcasting. The newspapers have got lots of faults of their own, but we need unbiased radio and TV. Scrap OFCOM, scrap the BBC license fee, and allow people to express themselves honestly, what they think, and then not allow, like the Greg Wallace thing, a massive outcry about things he did maybe 17 years ago. I mean, I don't agree with any of it. And if he's done it, I've got 2 daughters, I'd smack him in the face if he did that to my daughters or my wife. But some of it's 17 years ago, and some of it, it's like there's more important things now, isn't there? We're entertaining the butcher of Qatar, and people are worried about what some fat oik who supports Millwall said 17 years ago. Yes, we should be concerned, and yes, he probably shouldn't present for them again. But they employed him to be the mouthy Millwall greengrocer doing jokes about the size of his cucumber, didn't they? But it kind of sums up what the British media is like. And it all comes back to the BBC and OFCOM. If you scrap them and we had a free-for-all, so you could say, I like that. Why do you like it? Why do people say when they say, I like GB News, why do you like it? Because it says what I think. Do you remember that old I can't remember which political party, I think it was Haig. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Well, GB News have hit that nail right on the head. They'll fail because they've got this advertising boycott against them and the rest of it, and they're employing too many kids. They need some more maturity on there. but at least they're trying, and they're trying to break the mold. But you won't break it if you're Ofcom regulated. And that is why, the final thing I want to say today, that is why the internet and Elon Musk has got to be applauded. He's brought free speech back to Twitter. And again, the soft lefties don't like it because he's allowing right-wing views to be expressed on there as well as left-wing views, right? And that's the wrong kind of free speech for The Guardian. And so they're all going off to some blue sky shit thing that nobody goes on. So there's no point in doing that. They'll come back. I love it when they go, I'm leaving. I don't care. I literally don't care, right? Especially when that bridge left. I've never read one of their tweets. But anyway, this is the problem now. We've got the internet. So I'm doing this today. I'm in my mother-in-law's house. It's getting a bit dark, which is, you won't be, I'll be doing it in Braille in a minute. But I'm having my say. And you can watch it, like it, tell your mates about it, share it, whatever you want. But there's no regulator telling you you can or cannot watch it. Flip side of that is you don't get any money out of it. It's not got to the stage where you can monetize unless you're Joe Rogan. It will eventually, because people are turning away from the mainstream, lamestream broadcasters. They want a truth that they agree with or disagree with, but at least they want to know the presenter is saying it as he or she sees it. And that's all I'm trying to do. And so here we go. Begging bowl. If you can help me out, please buy me a coffee. www.buymeacoffee, all one word, .com/John Gaunt, JONGAUNT. Anything from a $5 upwards, it all helps to keep this going. And I hope you like my stories. I'm going to tell you more as we carry on over the weeks. My stories of what happened to me in broadcasting. I'll tell you some very, very on the nail stories about appearing on programs like Alan Titchmarsh. I've got tales to tell you about him, let me tell you, and Richard and Judy, all coming up in the weeks to come, as well as doing the political stories of the day. If you like it, please tell all your friends. If you're listening to the audio version, I've now got it on YouTube, Steam version, basically. Picture's not that good, but it's getting better. I've got my lights coming, hopefully, tomorrow. So watch it on YouTube as well. It's on John Gaunt TV. I'm trying to get the hours up because if you get 4,000 watching hours, I used to have 78,000, but because I stopped doing it for 2 years, it's only in the last 365 days. So I've got nearly 2,000 now. I need 2,000 more. So the longer you watch me for on YouTube, I'll get to that target. Then once I get to that target, I can monetize these videos. So even if you listen to the audio, please think about also watching it on YouTube, John Gaunt TV. And then I'm going to do live shows on YouTube. I'm going to do interviews with famous people and not so famous people. All that is coming down the line because John Gaunt is back and I'm not controlled. I'm doing what I want to do. And if you like it, please tell your friends about it. But the most important thing, if you've got kids, give them a kiss, give them a hug. Hey, 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 don't forget to tell them you love them. I'll see you. Bye.